might have noticed that I've stopped fairing the hull. It's not smooth yet, but I'm not going to continue smoothing it up until all of the interior is stable and these edges are completely stable. They've still got a little bit of flex in them, so I'm going to set the decks in, lay the deck planks, and I'm going to put a solid hardwood rubbing strip around the edge and then be able to flip it over and do the final smooth. So she'll be shiny and smooth and terrific once everything inside has been done. So that brings us to the stage now where we've got to set in the remote control gear. Here's the little servos. I've got two of these. One will turn the rudder and the other will stop and start the motor. So I've got to figure out how to do that, which is going to be hours of fun, I'm sure. While I've got you here, while I'm trying to figure out how to make this little servo with an arm turn the rudder, which smarty can figure out what I've done wrong here? It had me baffled for a little while, but what it is I have my two hinge pins there, and I have another pin at the bottom to stabilise the bottom, and I put this hinge in and I put the pin in the bottom, and I realised that I've made a terrible mistake. This pin must be in line with these two. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this pin off. I'm going to put a little block of wood, set a little block of wood into this, into the foot of the rudder, and I'll have the pin in line with the other two so that it actually swivels the way it should do. But there was a little conundrum that had me baffled for a little while. But back to the remote control. I've already set the motor onto a little engine mount inside, and I'll show you that in detail later on. But now I've got to figure out how to do the rudder. So what I've done is I've got a little servo here that I've mounted on some wood, just a simple little bit of construction, and I've got to set it underneath the deck because it can't get wet, and it's got to be in line. And then they have these little arms that actually rotate when you flip the toggle on the remote control. So I'm thinking I have to have a shaft coming up that goes through the deck with a rubber seal around it so water doesn't get in. I've got to waterproof this whole back section to protect the servo from getting wet, and I've also got to have a battery pack in here to run the servo. It's got to run down to the little gizmo that does the whatever it is. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. If you are into remote control things, they all have the same basic setup. And then I've got to, coming out of the deck, I've got to somehow make an arm that comes up underneath the tiller and holds onto the tiller somehow, again, and turns as I move the joystick. Now see, that's the beautiful thing about this kind of a job. There's many ways I could do it. I want it to look nice, so I'm thinking the little arm that goes underneath the tiller is going to be a nice piece of wood with maybe a brass pin that goes through the tiller. Maybe I could, sort of do a U-shaped piece of wood on a piece of brass. There's many different ways I can do it. So I'll have a great time figuring that out, and in the end it'll be terrific. And there's even another way that I could do it, by putting a little wheel onto the servo with some cable of some sort, and I could have two little rivet holes here, and I could attach the cables coming through the little rivet holes to the tiller and turn it like that. Might even be a more elegant way to do it. So I'm beginning to like the little cable idea coming through here for a few reasons. One, I've got some really nice little brass eyelets that I can set into this beautiful shiny wood. And the other thing is, I think it's going to give me a bit less chance of water getting to the electrics. Because if I have a shaft coming up through the deck, there's a possibility that it can seep in, which would go directly into the servo. So if I have just two little holes in the side, that's going to give me less chance of any trouble. But the bottom line with all of this stuff is it can't break. Nothing can go wrong, because I'm going to be throwing it into the Indian Ocean, and if something snaps or something goes wrong, I could lose it. It could just drift off to Madagascar. So I've got to consider all the possibilities and make sure that what I do in this part of the structure is pretty well unbreakable.